Live streaming is on.
All right, so here we are with current events discussion part two. And we were interrupted by the streaming software that we have, which is good for a little break. But what we got now is political spectrum.
Yes. Okay. So, are you just going to start on that topic then?
Well, it's like you were finishing a riff
Okay.
right when we got interrupted, so you can take it from the top, or we can go back in
Yeah.
from my side.
Sure.
Go
So I'll
ahead.
finish that. So basically, I saw a parallel. You were saying that there was a bit of a minor upgrade that was happening from the left-right current spectrum to more four quadrants. And in reality, it's some more complex shape. It's a lot more dynamic. And I think that a lot of people, the impression that I have on some things that are being talked about by the far left or the left right now is that it's like it appears as if it's going from category, not category, from all or nothing to, let's add in a fork in this and let's upgrade it mildly. And so when I think of intersectionality, it's like okay, so if you take an intersection and it's an X and you flip it on the Z axis, it almost looks like the beginning of a hierarchy. And if you have another intersection on one side, well, now you have like another branching that's going. But it doesn't appear. It seems like it's. I imagine it that it's people who had a. I don't want to speak in general that it's all people who align with these ideas, but it appears to me that some percentage of people who align with these ideas had a mindset that was kind of one or the other, and now they're having their mind blown, and it's like an awakening to them, and they're woke now in this thought that it's not just like one or the other, but it's more dynamic. But the amount of nuance that they're introducing, I think, is still a bit of an incomplete picture. And so I think that it does trip me out. I don't know. I think that it might be somewhat similar in that there's, like you were saying, there's an attempt right now at an upgrade, and that's being entertained by some people. So it's like within the range of things that the public can talk about. I forgot what that concept was called.
Overton window.
Right. It's now getting within the Overton window, but it appears that you want more than that. You think it's going to take a bit more than that. And that's kind of where I think that with some of these ideas that are some of the thought processes that at least my group is focusing on, is that it's like some of them are trying to upgrade their own internal understanding, and everyone has to do that as they can, but it's like it just seems like there's still a bit that's being missed. And because the entirety of experiences are holistic, they are dynamic, they do contain so many variables. If you personally get an experience and a sense of passion, some people might say mania, if you get really excited and you want to push forward in one direction, and you're seeing more than you were, but it's still not the whole thing, I think that can be dangerous. And I think that's what some people in my group are currently we're currently have a bit of fear on.
So you were very gated in the way that you talked about that, and so it's very difficult to
Sure.
track from the abstraction.
Yeah.
So if you could try and concentrate that and ground it now that you've kind of explored the territory, if you can make your point more precise, I think that would help the audience. I've followed close enough, but I would like a better phrasing if you could work it up.
I'm trying to think if I can think of a particular situation. So it's like, okay, so like one of the storylines goes that there is that black people are being murdered by cops, and that this is a problem. And it's like black people are being murdered, or black people are being, let's go with that word. Black people are being shot by cops, okay, and they die. It also happens to white people. We need to be able to know, is it disproportionate compared to their numbers in the general public? And we need to be able to say, like, there's a variety of circumstances. Were they armed? Were they unarmed? It just seems as if it all wants to focus in on just one point of view of this and then push that really hard. There are instances where black people are shot. There are instances where it absolutely needs to get taken to court, needs to go through, etc. And we need to have justice to the extent that our law provides and deems as necessary. It just appears that there is still a low resolution analysis, but there is also truth in that there's still progress to be made. I also just think that, like, what my group fears is that there's both a low level analysis and then a push for change really quick that may be radical. And was this all founded? Like, are there improvements that need to be made? Yes, but let's see if we can get a higher resolution analysis of exactly what is the true state of society and the problems that we have within it and the justice that we want to see for society. I don't know if that got you any closer.
I track better, so I'll try and re-articulate it, with more precision from my perspective.
Sure.
And man, I'm just going through like every one of my core riffs as we go. So I'm gonna riff on I'm gonna try and embed what you're saying, and then I'm gonna have a riff, and then I want to get back to the political spectrum thing because it's an important riff. But this is one I've talked about a couple times with various groups when I've talked about it, and it's the core flaw of objectivity and subjectivity, and that we are not modeling that core philosophical branching point correctly. But I'll get into that as I follow this. So what you were saying is basically that there's two objective measures, is I guess the word to use, that each group is tracking. One is death rate per capita to police, and then death rate per violent crime to police.
Yes.
And those are two different objective measures that are being tracked. One side is hierarchically flipping them so that one is on the top and the other is on the bottom, so that the important variable is the per capita death rate, which is very high for black people. And this is what the emphasis is on by the people within social justice. And then the other side is flipping it the other way so that the emphasis is on deaths rated by violent crime, which is roughly equivalent to that of white people.
Okay, but even the problem here is, like, we are not willing to look at the full set of circumstances that has even caused this to be, because I think that we are looking at the result, or some people are looking at the result, and because they can point at that result, there's not going to be justice until the result is what they want to see. The question is, well, first off, what do they want to see? I mean, if you want to see it go down to zero, I don't think that's going to happen, because white people are still shot. At least there's a lot of...
let's discard the so crazy that it can never happen kind of thing, and let's focus on, the sane version of their position, which, is hey, black people are being shot more than white people per capita. We need to fix this problem because there's a lot of dysfunction that leverages off of this observation.
I agree, but so the question is, what are the solutions here? It's like, I think
yes. Obviously, we need to get to that point in discussion, but there's a lot of people who think that the buck stops at, well, the violent crime level of black people is this, and it's equivalent, so there's no actual racism in the system. And it's like, that does not actually address the problem that people are pushing forward.
No, but yeah, so it's in the terminology we use as well. So like what I see is I see 330 million individuals trying to live a life, and I see we are in a system, and one side wants to focus on the system. What can we do to tweak the system? And then another side is, I think, focused on kind of personal responsibility, we could say. And so to what extent do individuals, then also grouping individuals within communities, play into the dynamics that can lead to the result that we currently see? And so I think that my group is tending to lead towards, we have already made a lot of progress within the system itself, that there are sane things that we can continue to do to transform the system, to get the results that I think we all want. I really do think that we all want. For the most part, it depends on the specifics, and it's just how do we get there. And so my group would be more thinking along the lines of, personally, I think of what's the impact of the welfare state, and then what's the impact of basically the war on drugs. I think that those are two main threads. And I tend to think that, and this can spread, people can hate on me all they want, but I tend to think that there is something that goes along with, and this is, I think, case selection here, maybe. I don't know. I might be switching them up, but it basically, children require a lot of time investment. They need like healthy environments, healthy communities. They need, they need to be able to explore. And so I think that if you live in an environment where there are a lot of adults who are healthy and responsible, that can be a role model for you, that's a good thing. And so if we do currently have disproportionately a lot of men, but adults who are taken away from their families, that has got to be a contributing factor. We have to be able to talk about that. And so like for me, it's like it appears to be the case, and it may not be, because you're more, and you're seeing a lot more of this and talking to people who consider themselves social justice warriors. It appears kind of from the outside that there are certain things that are focused on that may not give the best results. And when I say that, it appears that some of the solutions are, well, let's throw money at the problem. Let's do reparations. I am not 100% across the board against reparations. It depends in kind of like how it's distributed and like towards what.
Yeah. It's so like with this, like you were definitely going off into what I describe as autism land, trying to this is a very emotionally weighted topic, and you're trying to like block yourself out so that you can process this and speak to it, despite the amount of basically inbuilt trauma that this conversation has produced across society because of the finger pointing of your racist. So you're like in your mind, like it's super filtered back, trying to talk about this thing, which is terrifying as fuck to actually talk about, especially as a white guy.
Yeah, sure.
So like you're definitely like, you're making it like, I guess you're in a super awkward place. And so I'm going to try and like walk you out of that a little bit so that we can have a, more of a riff, more of a flow about the conversation.
Yeah. And real quick, so I probably am on the spectrum. So
no, it's me too. I know this because it's me, and it's just that I've been blessed with like a decade worth of inner work, essentially figuring out, what it is that I'm doing that's broken and how to fix it behaviorally. But I'm tracking with you, and it's basically you have no model for how to carry on this conversation in like a pro-social way. So you're in like this layered defensive way, trying to process it out, and it's very difficult. But this is sort of like a you're in you're in the defensive space because that's the only space you've been allowed to be in, sort of, for the conversation.
This is true. Yeah.
And like I'm much more into the let's have the free flow conversation. Let's be willing to make mistakes, and recognize that this is a very difficult conversation to have, and it's absolutely terrifying to actually try and do it. And
it is. Just real quick, like I have had all throughout my life, being that I may be on the spectrum, I've had experiences where I do say the wrong thing, and it's like really the wrong thing, and people let me know it. So because this is for people that are not even on the spectrum to be able to talk about this. It's already seems to be a bit guarded. Maybe I'm a little more so than usual. I'm like, man, I really don't want to screw up and have like a mob of 500,000 people or whatever, like people just trying to ruin me. Like that's not good. So yeah.
Yeah, but you're brave enough to try and engage the conversation. I'd like, kudos on that, respect. This is the kind of thing, like when you, let me put it this way, when you listen to, like, a lot of the forefront of Black people, a lot of what they're trying to ask for, even within like the frame of social justice, is for us to be less uptight about this conversation so we can actually start having it.
Yeah.
But, they're also in the, defensive position of their own, which is that they need to defend themselves against racism because it does do traumatic damage, like to them as individuals and as a collective. So, they can't ask for exactly what they really want because they can't risk what they're asking for being taken as license for racists to spout racism.
Okay, so real quick, I want to see if we can sync on one of the major terms here. So, like, what is your qualification for like a racist? And when I want to take about 30 seconds, like something that I've pitched to my group is the idea that there is an equilibrium that's going on, where where basically you can think of like my side talks about like Antifa and there's a lot of Antifa out there, and then this stuff is difficult to talk about, and then like my side wants to push it to but racism will always exist, therefore, and then so they want to shut it out. You know what I mean? We can't get it down to zero. End of discussion. That's just the way to not talk about it anymore. And I'm like, wait, but that's not. I want to keep going. And so my thought is, if we just throw a number out there and we say that there's around 200 million adults, 0.2% of adults would get about 40,000. And I think maybe there's roaming around it, on the whole at any one time about 40,000 Antifa. Like, what if there's about 40,000 like people who I would qualify as racist, people who not only have this internalized understanding, but they're, probably not too organized, but in my opinion, it's not too organized, but they are in whatever way that they can influence throughout their life and get away with it, then they're trying to perform racist actions. I don't know that. That seems, because we don't know the number. This isn't really tracked. That's just something that I throw out. Is if it's an equilibrium, maybe like one extreme has about this number and the other extreme has about that number. But you spread that out throughout the whole of the United States with 330 million people. I do think it's not too many people on my qualification that both internalize it and are going to go to the extent that they're going to try to have like real racist actions. That's not to say that there isn't a lot of impact. That doesn't mean that people can't be in an area where the demographic and
I track with you, and I have a pretty decent articulation for this.
Okay.
And so let's see here. So one of the things is that a lot of people think that there's a relational binary, which is peace and war. And I don't think that is an accurate model of sort of the relational categories. I think that you might have, I think you might have friendship, and I don't think that friendship is exactly the right word there, but it's like deep bond, like like I would die for you, you would die for me on a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think family captures that. I don't think friendship captured that. So, you might have like brotherhood. Like, I think that might be the American word for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's, linguistically, it's not as elegant as I want, but the next step away from that is fraternity.
Yep.
And I mean fraternity in both the collegiate sense to some degree, but also in the liberté, égalité, fraternité of the French Republic, meaning brotherhood, but meaning sort of brotherhood of man.
Mm-hmm.
And this sense is the I would die for you and you would die for me because of what we believe in versus on a
Right.
personal level,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
And then you get sort of to what I might call tribe or tribal nation.
Hmm.
And I mean this in kind of the sense of like the Iroquois. We speak the same language. We share some sense of the same culture. And so I share implicit trust with you because you and me think alike in such a way that you and me can expect our interaction to play out in a game theoretically positive way as default,
Yep.
right?
Hmm.
And so that is, tribal nation, and that is sort of, fraternity is like, I may not know you, but you have passed the passcode to me, the handshake, therefore I can trust you to be part of the club. And this is sort of in the sense of Assassin's Creed kind of, um or various different fraternity, like the IDW handshake, a like there's a certain kind of relationship you can have with a stranger where after you've met, like, you have a deep sense of connection, where like the shared thing is a I will die for you, you will die for me sense. And this might be, um inactive isn't quite the right word, but hibernating during peacetime, but will sort of activate during wartime. And this is one of the things that we do not have that we are seeking in society. Sebastian Junger wrote a book, Tribe, that I think, he doesn't say it explicitly as I have, but sort of talks about the need for this kind of relationship with others, and
Hmm.
also to some extent, the tribal nation relationship with others. And then, outside of the tribal nation, there's peacetime, which is sort of, you are different from me, but we have no beef.
Hmm.
And so when we meet, um, we cannot share implicit trust because we do not understand each other, so we cannot predict each other, but we can build that trust. And that is sort of our expectation from our meeting, is to find a way to find trust with each other
Hmm.
by default.
Yep.
And meanwhile, negotiating the sense there may be an ulterior motive that we should not allow ourselves to be vulnerable to each other.
Hmm. Yeah, all of that makes sense to me. And I think that two things that are currently missing that we have had in the past is along the lines of uh, families in general have kind of been decimated, or they're being rethought after there has been a major shift. We now have both male and female. I think that that's the norm now. Both are working, they're both paying taxes, and they are both spending a chunk of their lives elsewhere instead of being able to keep the kind of nuclear family going. And I think the other one is just a general sense of community. And we don't have that kind of on a, some places do and some places don't. And where we do, the community spirit may not be in the best interest of that community or in a more broader setting. So it depends. Like gangs can be one grouping that is good for kind of, or it works. It's a survival mechanism. It's a different strategy for playing games in life and trying to acquire resources and such. But for the broader community, it's often destructive, and it can also be protective. It depends on how it plays out. So we definitely, I don't know that I have too good of an understanding of history to say that these are massive shifts, because like even the notion that I was just pointing at was a nuclear family. Apparently, that's only been here for a few generations now or so. Before that, we had more of an extended family. But even if you take out, if you say that the nuclear family has been somewhat destroyed in certain areas of the United States, it's not to say that we have an extended family. Then we just don't really have a sense of collective values at the family level anymore. We're at each other's throat a lot of times. So.
Right. I'm following with you. So let me reframe my line, like my
Sure.
lineup here. So I think blood,
Mhm.
like the deep concept of blood, not like the shallow concept of blood, but the deep concept of blood, the kind of blood brotherhood.
Mhm.
That's a pact between you and another person that's on a personal level. But
Mhm.
blood also captures family, and that's the I will die for you, you will die for me because of
Mhm.
our shared blood.
Yeah.
And that kind of that plugs directly into kind of the lineage selection psychology that we have, which is what makes you willing to die for your children. And some of the most beautiful sacrifices humans are willing to make for the greater good come from that place.
Yeah. Well,
And it's
some
a
of
very
the,
deeply sacred place, but it's also capable of being perverted
I was
into
gonna
such a
say.
thing that turns into a deep evil.
Yes.
And so we need to be aware and guarded against the pathology of blood, but we cannot live without it as our best selves, because the best selves are also come from it.
Yeah. It just sounds like in a lot of ways that there are things that can manifest in kind of intensity and direction, and it depends on if you're in within kind of a healthy range of intensity and where you're directing this influence, this energy, as to whether it'll be like considered pro-social or anti-social. I think, and that works out at all the levels.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I know personally for me, I am a bit weird in that I can make deep connections with individuals, and then I can have a very global sense of connection. And the ones that are the intermediaries, I don't know that I have too much. And the question is, am I just born this way, or is it something that didn't make circuits? Can it be built now that I'm an adult? Is that what I truly want? I don't know. There's a lot of variants out there. I might be an extreme variant here. So,
We've got blood,
Mhm.
fraternity,
Mhm.
tribe nation,
Mhm.
peacetime, and then play war.
Mhm.
And so play war is sort of a conflict that is potentially violent or sort of procedurally violent.
Okay.
But the purpose of the fight is not to be fatal, but rather to demonstrate superiority.
Mhm.
And so you get this kind of interaction is a bar fight. Like oftentimes it's essentially you go to the bar intending to start a fight. It's not personal. It's shit talking. It's to show off. And
Mhm.
the idea of it is not actually to hurt each other, but just to look badass in front of everybody else.
Mhm.
This also is Counting Coup. If you know about Counting Coup, Plains Indians, and a lot actually of indigenous culture around the world. And the idea is that to be in a state of war and to touch your enemy, and ideally to take something from his person without him recognizing that you are there.
Yeah. So, do you play all these different games? Like, do you go into bars looking for prove dominance and stuff like that? I'm just wondering,
Uh,
as a person who considers himself on the spectrum, I don't personally do that. I'm
yeah,
wondering,
no,
wondering if you
it's
do.
not like it's something I've thought of doing a couple times.
Yeah.
Um, and
Other people
it's
do it. Maybe I should try it, but it's not
like,
natural for me at all.
but the idea there is that there's a potential for death, so you have to confront the fear of death. So it's not a like you cannot play it with immortality,
Right.
and a lot of dynamics with immortality become pathological if you don't manage them properly.
Right.
So it's the mortality is in the game when
Mhm.
you're in play war, but the purpose of the game is not fatality.
Mhm.
And that makes it so that there's a demonstration of skill and competence
Mhm.
of a high level that allows you to de-escalate a brewing conflict from a fatal sign, and then ideally to build a bond of trust
Mhm.
out of that conflict. Sort of, if you and this we have this embedded in a lot of our mythological stories, where like for example, Luke Skywalker was like, I will not kill you, father. You were like my father. And then this gives his, but like on the other side, it's kind of, well, that's not the ideal example, but the idea is that eventually his father is able to recognize the good in himself and then turn against the evil emperor.
Mhm.
Right. And then, so that is how healing comes to the galaxy. Now, that's, but that's like one mythological event. But if you look at it, it's you defeat the evil and then you give the evil an opportunity to become good. You don't kill it. Right?
Yep.
And that's embedded in like almost every hero's journey narrative that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
So, well, with the Luke Skywalker one, you're killing an aspect of yourself, but you continue on and you transcend a darker element of yourself. And I think within the non-fatalistic, game that we're playing, that a lot of people play, I do it more intellectually, I think, but it is testing boundaries and kind of, yeah, like you're saying, proving competency within a group and trying to, yeah, see how many points you can get, but in a way that you're hopefully, I think that the healthy way is in a way that nobody gets ruined. So reputation doesn't get entirely ruined where they have to get thrown out. At least I hope not, unless they're truly pathological. But you do, there is a game being played and there's supposed to be results of it. And one of the, even saying it like that, like the way that you're purely analyzing it, I think that I'm going to flip it on you and say that's kind of like an autistic interpretation. Like a lot of people don't take it to that level. I think they just go through the actions. They just get the, instinctual drive to someone piss them off and they're going to, go at it or something like that. I don't know if you were mentioning this in a way where it's always intentional. Like you said that someone goes in the bar and they're looking for a fight, versus they happen to be at a bar and something comes up and they don't consciously truly process it, but they feel driven to start a fight. Do you see that distinction? Or
yeah, I follow, like, the level of self-awareness that plays out is
right.
There's layers to it.
Yeah.
I don't want to get lost in the weeds on that, but sort of
Sure.
like one of the things that's very, very important in sort of play war dynamics from, my analysis of this kind of stuff is there's like one of the things that's really frustrating about COVID is the, anti-masking is masculine
Mm-hmm.
take that
Right.
happened on some part of the right. And it's fuck you, you asshole. That's like, you've got this completely backwards. The point of masculine risk taking is personal risk taking to protect the collective.
Hmm.
In other words, a demonstration of I am willing to take a personal risk.
A perceived personal risk.
Well, a personal risk is perceived as a layer that when it's perceived, like, okay, so another way to say it is skydiving is spectacularly dangerous and we've managed to make it very, very safe.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a perceived risk or a real risk? It's a very real risk. Like the way to talk about skydiving is not that you have the backpack with the 2 parachutes and the second parachute is rigged to a altitude timer, but is that if you do not pull your own chute, you die.
Right.
So you have to be competent enough that faced with fatality, you can coordinate yourself enough to reach around and pull out a parachute and then handle what happens after that.
Yeah, I think that this is a difficult one to talk about because I'm not fully mapping that onto COVID though. Because
just give me a minute and I'll articulate it. So with parachuting, like, yeah, there's a backup safety system, but who trusts that shit? Nobody. So it's like the point is if you're going to be skydiving, you can't rely on that. You have to rely on your own ability to handle the stress of the moment in such a way that you can articulate your body, pull your thing, manage your chute, land where you want to land. Now, if you don't do that stuff competently, you die or injure yourself. There's like, it's if you stand in the train tracks, the train will run you over unless you move.
Mhm.
it requires a certain level of competence to get out of the way.
Mhm.
That getting out of the way is 2 steps.
Yeah. So
But
how
is
are
it
you
perceived
tracking
risk
this
or
though?
real risk? If
Well,
you are standing on the train tracks past where the train naturally breaks at the station,
mhm,
you have a lot of perceived risk, but no real risk. If you stand where the train is naturally going to be at full speed and
mhm.
jump out of the way, you have a lot of perceived risk that is correlated with real risk that is spectacularly manageable, but nonetheless real. Those are 2 different situations.
Yeah, but both of those situations are rather extreme, I think, and don't fully map onto COVID in that, like, the vast majority of people do survive. And the only time that you start to get towards a place where that might flip is, I don't know, 90 plus or 85 plus or somewhere around there. So the whole of society, for the vast majority of people, it's not quite, I don't know that it's that extreme. But there is still, like you said, there is a mitigation of a risk and actions that you can take to mitigate that risk. And so in
Yeah,
that sense,
so
I think that it tracks.
COVID is a collective risk. It's a personal risk, but the personal risk is embedded in the collective risk.
It is, and it depends not only on what actions we take, but
So
how those
let
actions
me
disrupt the regular flow of society and what the consequences of that is as well.
yes. And so the point I was trying to make is, like, if you are a warrior or
Mhm.
hunter in a tribe and you provoke a bear near the tribal settlement to
Mhm.
show off, you
Mhm.
are an asshole,
Mm. Yeah.
because the bear will rampage potentially through the village, potentially killing somebody else's children.
Mhm.
Fuck you, you asshole. This
Okay.
is equivalent to the COVID situation. You are provoking the virus by not wearing a mask.
Yeah,
You
I'm
asshole.
not. We are definitely going to disagree on this one, and I could get it. It depends on, like, what scale of time you're looking at. It depends on, like, so many different things. I could go on for this for a long time, but basically, in a nutshell, what appears to be at any one stage of the development of this, like, life cycle of the pandemic, the policies will shift over time. It'll depend on, like, a multitude of factors. One of the things that I find interesting is that in Texas, we appear to have public policy set in such a way that we closed down somewhat late, and then we opened up pretty early. And what we got off of that was a lot of people, I think, a lot more people than perhaps are showing in the statistics, were infected, and that's actually a good thing. And the reason that's a good thing is because it was during summer, and during summer, the UV was so low. What we saw mapping with that was starting in around May, the viral loads were orders of magnitude lower. They were seeing this in a lot of hospitals. So there was still exposure that probably was in part due to people wearing masks. Another big part was the UV. I think that was more of an overriding factor. And what you have whenever you have a certain percentage of the people who are essentially immune, they've already been through it. They had lower viral loads, so they did get infected, but overwhelmingly there wasn't as many deaths for the amount of people that were
So, like,
infected.
the
The RT drops, so the effective replication rate drops, and so therefore you can open up policy later whenever temperatures begin to drop, and you will have less deaths. You'll have the economy more opened up, et cetera, et cetera. It depends on
so
what
yeah,
you're considering.
the discussion of COVID, we could go for
Yeah,
hours. I was
yeah,
volunteering 100-hour weeks in February
sure.
on COVID. I could talk your ear off. I could debunk everything. I could, make a
You could
case for
attempt to.
a completely different perspective. This is not, to me, an important discussion to have, like, on a broad level.
Sure.
Like, there is some level of what you're saying that is perhaps correct, but it's sort of, it's like, dodging the bull with the, reg thing matador on the virus. And I don't like the downsides of having a virus that is this deadly become endemic, make the pitch of herd immunity kind of
It's
a
going to be endemic
non-starter.
no matter what we do. Even if there's vaccines, it'll be endemic, et cetera, et cetera. It's so far from being contained on a global scale, at a national scale, any of the scales. We messed this up very early. It's going to go endemic most
Yes, and
likely.
so, like, the thing is that, part of the thing that I'm, I guess, playing defense for here is we had the wrong mindset about this virus from the beginning.
In the very beginning.
We judged the damage and risk of it an order or two lower than it actually was, because
I
we
think we just
missed.
we didn't act. I
Yeah,
don't
we
know that I
we
agree with that.
completely we completely miscategorized the severity of the virus because we were looking at it in terms of death rate and not in terms of societal impact of a pandemic, because there's pandemic psychology, and there's a COVID tax. Every social interaction is taxed by the risk of infection and the impact of that infection on your life. 20 to 50% of people who get infected have long-term symptoms. There's a lot of major
I don't know if
downsides.
this is I honestly, I challenge the notion that this is so much different from any regular virus that is approximately as deadly after it has gone through its initial novelty stage. I think that what the insights that we're going to find from this virus, it will end up being somewhat similar and being able to be mapped to all different kinds of viruses that we no longer put in as much resources into. I bet I found studies on the Spanish flu that showed that similar things. And I don't think that you have to go to that level of deadly to see that this same pattern plays out. I think that if we were looking close enough and long enough for even influenza, I think people who have bad cases of influenza, you would actually find that a chunk of the people probably do have some of these long-term side effects as well. We're just not tracking it.
True, but this is all about like the miscalculation. We should have taken it way more seriously, been way more prepared, and it should not have been allowed to become a global pandemic.
I agree. Yep.
Now that it's a global pandemic, we need to there's two things that come out of this. One, we may need to accept that this is going to suck, motherfucker.
Mm-hmm.
Do not want to take that position, because that then grants credence to the people who were the most incompetent in their let's say reaction to this virus.
Ooh, that's
And
interesting.
that is the problem that I'm trying to fight, because if we're sort of granting credence that those people are correct, we will not be prepared for the next virus. And the thing is that, God, are bioweapons fucking terrifying. How are we this unprepared for bioweapons?
Mm-hmm.
Fuck
fully
all
agree
you
with you there.
assholes.
Yeah, I fully agree with you there.
Like, I'll get back to the other
Sure.
discussion,
Sure.
which is that there's the play war dynamic, and a big part of it is, hey, look, I can take a personal risk, which is touching my enemy without killing him. Killing him is less risky. And the thing about not killing him is I demonstrated that I am a better warrior than he is by sneaking up on him and touching him. And I've also demonstrated that I'm honorable in such a way that I am not a threat to him if he is not a threat to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that he can extrapolate from me to my brothers that peace is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can make peace within play war, and no one has to die.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what bravery is about. That's what honor is about.
Mm-hmm.
Like the psychological things in ourselves that make us be brave and make us feel honor and act out honorable things have to do with that dynamic, right?
Yep.
And that it's masculine to not wear a mask is exactly the opposite of that. It is, I'm taking a risk that is amplifying the risk of society. And the correct thing, like, if you like, it can't necessarily apply to the pandemic, but there are things that are there are types of, like, we've eliminated risk in society that allows this type of risk taking. And so it makes it very difficult to be a man in the correct way. Because the correct way is like, hey, look, I will take a personal risk. Skydiving is a good example in that you take a personal risk that is your risk. It's not everyone else's risk. And then you demonstrate competence.
There is a level of perception here, because the people who are willing to take the risk and see it as, I don't know if they do or do not, some of them do see it as, I'm going to exert my will, and then they may happen to be a man, and then they're not wearing a mask. I think that in their minds, they're not considering what you're saying, that they're harming the group. I think in their minds, it is a notion of there are like kind of individual rights and values that have consequences if we I think that it's the opposite of what you're saying, that either which way, if we give them ground, then we're losing what I value. Does that make any sense? So from there,
no, I track with that, but the thing is that all these people, like a lot of people, are just playing the I have a medical exemption card. Like they're doing the most pathological version of this. They're not standing on any actual principle. They're just ego tripping.
okay. So what about, I don't know that I'm going to come up with a good, I mean, I'm thinking of like a male who's driving and he has an urge to go faster than the flow of traffic and he wants to show off or whatever. And there's a game that he's playing there as well that he may or may not be conscious of, which is like, I'm willing to take risks. I am someone who can take the personal brute force of something that happens to me and I'm just going to go for it. Do you see that kind of the same way, that they're endangering like the whole in that instance?
In a car and a motorcycle, not.
Not? Okay. You don't think
a
it's
motorcycle.
Like somewhat? Oh, okay. In a car, yes. In a motorcycle, no?
Yes.
Okay.
You tracked correctly, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's how it would be. Okay. So, but you're not okay with that then? Like whenever there's a guy and he's speeding like down the highway or something like that in a car, would you have that same sense that you're endangering the rest of us?
I mean, speeding in a car is fucking fun. It's hard to say don't do this shit, especially because the speed limits are kind of broken.
Yeah.
And so it's like, like that kind of like showing off bravado thing. We don't have a lot of good examples because all of the examples have been eliminated from society. All the things that you can do to do this have been kind of eliminated from society. We don't have practical, tangible examples.
Yeah.
The provoking a bear that has its territory on the territory of your village, but at the edge of its territory away from your village is a very brave thing. Confronting that same bear within its same territory when it's at the edge of your village is a very foolhardy thing.
Right.
And like, we don't have really examples that articulate this well in modern society because we've eliminated all the things where we get to joust properly.
But do you think that that's part of this? Is that whenever there is an emergency situation, there's a kind of need to express this because it used to be within our environment? Okay.
Yeah. So like the correct example in the modern world is, hey, I quit my job to volunteer on COVID. I took a personal risk. Now there's a lot of upside to volunteering on COVID. You get around with a lot of awesome people. I've got some great contacts now where I've built a lot of trust with high level intellectuals. I've got a chain of network where people trust me, I trust people, where they know my name, where it's like these are some of these people are going to be starting big businesses in like the coming decades and stuff because they're hyper competent getting out of college. College was sort of canceled, they were out for the summer, and so it's like I know these Harvard people and like Caltech people and shit that I would have never had a chance to meet if I hadn't volunteered. So it's like I took a personal risk, and attendant with that risk is a potential reward, but I have to demonstrate my confidence in order to achieve that reward. There's an element of that plays out exactly in this honor and brave dynamic that I'm talking about that was volunteering on COVID, right? So like, but how do you describe volunteering on COVID as a honorable and brave thing? Like, it's very difficult to articulate that. It seems, the overwhelming articulation is it's an empathetic thing to do, not a brave / honorable thing to do.
Yeah, we don't have that vocabulary too much.
Yeah, we don't have. It's like a, it's sort of feminine in a way. Where for me, it was largely a very masculine plunge.
Yeah, but I don't think that. I just think that it's a difference of kind of like perception, and whenever society tends to do these things for whatever reason, they want to color it like this, like it's a feminine thing and it's a masculine thing. I typically just ignore it because I think it depends on how you're expressing it or how you internalize it. Like, what does it mean for you? And I don't know. I mean, I guess I understand you're focused on how society views this, and you think it's backwards, that the record needs to be set straight. I
In
guess.
some sense, I mean, I was definitely there because I had an empathetic reaction to like what this is going to do to society.
Mhm.
And then, I also had a massive fear reaction. Like I was terrified and it's like, fuck, this is going to be really bad. This could destabilize society. We need to do something about it.
Yeah.
But that's the honorable place to be,
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
like,
So,
sort of sacrificing myself and my time to this honorable goal of trying to save this thing. And the not honorable, not masculine response of fuck you, I'm not wearing a mask,
Mhm.
and look at me, how brave I am for taking the risk of getting sick, when the risk of getting sick is actually the risk of transmitting sickness to people who will actually die,
okay, so
versus
let me put up a
you
scenario
who
for
are
you.
playing the stunt of being healthy enough that you're not actually going to take a fatality.
Okay, so here's something, and it actually goes really well with what I just did. I left my house. I didn't have my mask. I walked a couple miles, and about a mile in, I realized I didn't have my mask. Now, in Texas, most people are not walking. I'm not going to see anyone while I'm walking. I put the mask on as soon as I'm going to go inside the place. That's where my personal line is. People have all different kinds of lines. Some people go in their car with the windows up and they put on the mask for their whole journey. So it's whatever your line is. I noticed that I did get looks whenever I went inside. And I just pushed them to the side, and I do understand the concerns. Typically, I do have the mask, and I understand that there is a risk here, and it can involve other people. The reality is, I haven't been out in about a week. I'm not going to go out for about another week. I'm most likely not going to infect anyone from what happened. That's the reality. But you don't know my story. You don't know my personal circumstance, and yet you can have that perception that, oh, look at this asshole, whatever. Like I did get a couple looks, and I know that they were trying to give me a shaming type of look. And it's like, I get it. I usually do. But this is just one of those where I thought about it. I was like, we really don't know. When you look at an individual, you have no idea what their true life circumstance is. But at the same time, I get what you're saying, that for the most part, the people who are entering situations where they're not wearing a mask, that most reasonable people would agree that you have a risk of infecting other people. Those people are looking to do I'm too tough for this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it, like, there it's, the fault is on you. You accept that the fault is on you, and the fault is on you because of an accident.
Yeah.
Whereas, the fault is on sort of like the you're not an anti-masker. The anti-masker, the fault is on them ideologically, and that's a much more serious fault.
Right.
And so, that's play war dynamics. I tried to articulate it. We definitely got off onto a long tangent because, a lot of like the deep, important, sacred psychology, especially of men, is in the space of play war. From like an evolutionary perspective, it's the management of risk and the management of confrontation. And that's like deep sacred masculinity. That's sacred masculinity, the masculine spirit, all that stuff. Like a lot of it is in that territory, and so it was worth the time and expanded discussion. And then the final frame of this is actual war. Well, maybe not literally the final frame. The final frame might be actual war, which is to force into submission through violence an enemy that cannot be reasoned with.
So real quick, I think we have about 8 minutes left in this. Okay, just making sure you know.
And so that is its own dynamic. And then there's kind of a war against a unabashed evil, which might be the final stage of this, which is a existential war. And so the war into submission is a pragmatic war in some extent, and then there's a existential war, which is a different type of war. So the fight in the UFC is a war. It's not a play war, but it is a type of war that is a play war. So like the goal is to beat into submission. The goal is, and there's sort of like point fighting might be a play war, whereas the UFC is a sort of true war. But both of them sort of fit in the demonstration of superiority, and there is a playful camaraderie that comes along with a lot of it. There's also a lot of obnoxiousness. Football is probably a better example than the UFC.
But are you trying to say that it is a true type of war like UFC, in that although it's not the purpose, there is the potential that there is fatality out of it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and it sort of the goal is to beat into submission. In a play war, the goal is to demonstrate the ability to obtain a superior position such that beating into submission is not necessary.
Right. Gotcha.
Whereas in like a real war, it's beat into submission, but it's not. Fatality is on the table as sort of a potentially necessary outcome. It's not the most desirable outcome.
Yeah.
The most desirable outcome is hey, we're going to go to war, and you're going to realize that you're going to lose, and therefore, we don't have to take this to the bloody end.
Right. It's essentially the most efficient use of energy that we can do to get the result that we want.
Yeah, and there's a lot of pathology that comes into real war. Like I want to skip past this because it's relatively intuitive.
Sure.
It's well-trod territory. The war against evil is the kind of the final thing, which is something that is incapable through every fiber of its being of finding a common ground worth sharing.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we want to essentially attempt to eliminate as much as possible. Yeah. And that's what people are jumping to right now. A lot of society's members are jumping to. And so somehow we have to at least try to drop it down a couple notches.
Yes. And so play war is a concept that I've kind of developed myself. I haven't seen it well articulated anywhere else. And, most of this thing is, and this is definitely my own structure that I've built, for trying to articulate these different types of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a overarching theme, which is something I discovered on the left as a rhetorical thought, which is right relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so right relationship goes from play war through to blood brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of economics is actually war by financial proxy. It's not play war, it's war by financial proxy.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not right. It's not a relationship within the bounds of right relationship.
Okay.
And, this is it's a long riff to go into, but I kind of want to just put a pin on that point.
Is your overall thought process there modern economics, as in, do you think that we are at a technological stage where gaming no longer makes sense, to where we are actually where there doesn't have to be a zero-sum game? Is that your overall thought somewhere around there?
There's a lot that goes into this. I think, are you willing to stay for another session?
No, I think I want to end this here. We might be able to do this again in another week, so we should stop on that thread.
Sure. Yeah. Kind of. I wanted to finish the thing on racism that we were talking about. So there's, you were talking about 40,000 Antifa and 40,000 alt-righters, or we'll just call them what they actually are, which is white supremacists.
So I don't think that is going to track fully, though. So in your mind, an alt-right person is a racist?
No.
Okay,
So
sure.
let's delve into this, because it's an important linguistic trap. So alt-right means alternative right.
That's right.
Alt-right means everybody who's on the political right wing who isn't a Republican.
Who isn't a Republican? The way that I heard it described to me recently was doesn't primarily include Christianity, but okay.
So alt-right really means people who are fed up with neoconservatism, but who are not Democrats.
Okay, gotcha.
Or who do not vote Democrat, is probably a better way to say it. So
that's a lot of people, though. I think that putting the right on there. Do you not think that there are a lot of people who are also fed up with the left?
There's plenty of people who are fed up with neoliberalism. They're the same ideology. But the thing is that
thrown into the alt-right.
Alt-right. No, the thing is that alt-right is a poisoned term, because alt-right does not mean alternative right. It means white supremacist.
It means white supremacist?
it's Rush conjugated. Whenever you see it in a news article, what they're implying is that this person is a racist.
Okay, yeah, but then that's the trap is it's because, well, they're not with me on the left, and so I have to throw them into something else, but they don't track with the traditional right, so I'm going to put them into this category called alt-right, but I also have this mapping of alt-right onto racist or white supremacist.
Yes, it's propaganda.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
alt-right has become propagandized. Fuck alt-right.
Right.
That's done. It's dead. I am not alt-right, even though
Okay.
I am described as alt-right, because what else am I doing to describe myself? So
Yeah.
I'm IDW, or whatever we're going to call ourselves.
Sure.
But what I've figured out is that this whole game doesn't really work. So
Okay.
there's a better word out there, and the better word is I am a right-wing progressive.
Okay. That works.
Yeah, you intuitively have a full grasp of what that roughly means.
Is it that you're socially liberal and fiscally conservative, or does that not map either?
No, I'm culturally right-wing, but progressive. I'm definitely further left in a lot of positions than the Democrat Party, but I don't have any interest in changing narrative team.
Live streaming is on.
So we're back from a quick interruption by the broadcast, but we're sort of slightly taking a break. But instead of having a part 3, we figured it would be better just to run this. So we'll get started in a minute. That's that. Yeah, so alt-right is kind of a broken term, and a better term is right-wing progressive. And kind of the riff that goes on this that we may get into, but might as well play with while we're waiting, is here we are.
Okay. Are we
all right?
live?
We're back on live because I didn't want to start a part 3.
Sure.
So we had a little intermission. But anyways, so yeah, I describe myself as a right-wing progressive, and I think that really captures my political position. It's not, I don't care about the quadrant model.
Yeah.
I'm fiscally and socially all over the place.
Yeah.
But I'm culturally embedded in Americana. And
in Americana, what is Americana?
The culture of America.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I think I track with all of that. I think that we probably are pretty similar. In all those ways, I don't know that I don't currently attach on to the label of right-wing progressive. I'm just tending towards not being able to jump into any of the main labels.
Yeah. Like, the idea of the label is if you don't have a label will be provided to you and you will not like it.
I mean, I am definitely experiencing that. So,
so yeah. I thought about it and I picked a label that is quadrant breaking. So that, like intuitively, right-wing progressive makes immediate sense. You're like, yes, there's something there that makes sense. I don't know exactly what it is, but it doesn't sound immediately insane. And I don't have a non-intuition of what that means. It's not gobbledygook. You have an idea of like, a right-wing progressive might be in favor of UBI, but then also pro, some form of traditional marriage. But it also might be somebody who is, in favor of gay marriage, but deeply bonded to some kind of, the Constitution. Like you don't really know exactly what it is, but you have an idea that it's an interesting landscape.
It just seems like this almost encapsulates almost everyone else that isn't on the wings right now. Like it seems like it encapsulates. Like I think I would be within this, and I think like most Americans would be within this if they just like processed it out and heard what you just said. So
yeah, so it's like, but it's more, the two people who are like, the traditionalist who's for UBI and the constitutionalist who's, for gay marriage. Those are kind of people who have a great conversation when they get together. They're not shouting at each other, So it's like, this is the territory. So, my riff on the political spectrum, which is, now where we're at, but, also the race thing. So, with the race thing, there are these racists, the white supremacists, and they are that, and they hide under the label of alt-right. Like altright.com is owned by Richard Spencer, and he's a white supremacist.
Okay.
So the label alt-right has been captured by white supremacists, and it has been propagandized by the Democratic Party to weaponize against, the non-establishment movement of the right, which is trying to fix America.
Okay.
And that's us. And we are right-wing progressives, and we are trying to save the world. And we're on team better world for
Team
everybody.
humanity. That's what I've
Yes,
been
exactly.
saying. I'm on team humanity. Come on, people.
But, moreover, team planet Earth.
Right.
Yeah. Team the best of conscious experience.
Sure, man. I mean, I want to take it. I'm more.
Yeah.
Eric, let's just shoot for the stars. We don't have to stop at
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, but it's like, all these things nest within each other and they bond within the good. And, that's what we're for. So, yeah, that's where we're at. I think that there's a reciprocal, which I would call a left-wing traditionalist.
Okay.
Which might be a feminist on a political level, but who wants a more traditional gender relationship.
Okay.
That might be like a rough benchmark. It's, I want equal rights on every part of the stack. I want choice. So that might be second wave feminist, but I think that left-wing traditionalist kind of captures that in a rough way, where, it's progressive, for me is sort of this policy innovation kind of stuff. And traditionalism has a lot more to do with what the cultural aesthetic and cultural relationship is. And so, progressivism to me is more on the technical side. And you can be a progressive traditionalist, which is you're somewhat deeply embedded in the cultural landscape and are playing with the longer cultural threads, but trying to integrate that with broader policy. And so, there's a lot of unexplored territory that, you can fit when you jump out of the left-right political spectrum.
So one of the integrations may be to be able to there's two ways you could approach it, is to get people on the extremes to go less extreme. And then the other one would be to marry in those two, the Republican progressive and traditional liberals, I think you were saying.
It's not Republican, right wing. That's an important distinction.
Sure.
It's right wing.
Okay. Right wing progressives, and then what is the reciprocal that you said?
Left wing traditionalist. Left wing
traditionalist. So if we were able to somehow join and see that we are all on team humanity, I mean, would that be 85% of us at that point, do you think? If we all became
it would be a far broader net, but the net doesn't have to stop there.
Okay.
So one of the things that I found very, very difficult to refine out of the discussion, but important to refine out of the discussion that's happening within woke circles, is the idea of, I think that one way to say it would be embedded racism.
Okay.
So we talk a lot about systemic racism, but we don't talk about habitual racism, sort of unconscious racism.
Okay,
or
so
embedded racism.
Can you differentiate both of those? So in your idea, the systemic racism is in the policy at the macro level, and then the I'm sorry, what was the other one? I think I'm starting to crash out.
Embedded racism.
Okay, and the embedded racism.
We're getting to the end of the story, but we're still. Well, let's try and finish strong.
Sure. So, are you able, real quick, to just differentiate?
Yeah. So, the systemic is kind of in legal code and in policy code and within broad systemic relationships. So this would be systemic racism would be the 13th Amendment pertains to ban slavery, but in fact only bans private slavery, the private ownership of slaves, and in fact allows slavery in the prison system. So we as a nation still have slavery within the prison system.
But this is you would consider this to be across races, right?
Except that because the environment in which Black people exist causes them to be the majority of people within prison.
Are they the majority?
Like, I don't know if it's a literal majority. As a fraction of population, it's quite high.
Yeah, I think that there's a little bit more white. I think I don't remember the percentage. It's 50 or
It doesn't
60.
matter though, because it's not the important
So
point of
it's it's the relativeness. You're saying disproportionately that this policy is okay. Gotcha.
Yes, and moreover that it doesn't align with any of the values that we actually care about. Yet, when you bring up this particular topic, there will be a lot of people who will knee jerk to defense of the 13th Amendment as written. Like there will be a bunch of people who knee jerk to, like, you know, if you go to jail, you earned your jail time, and you need to learn how to be a productive member of society, blah, 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 and will basically justify whatever's happening in a knee-jerk way.
Yeah, I guess what I'm wondering, I need to look at the actual, I've had a few people bring this up now, and I do understand that disproportionately that Black people, and I think also Native Americans, I'm not really sure, are in effect going to prison, and all the causes are many, but the end result is that exists. I guess it's the term, it is knee-jerk because is that truly slavery? If we think of what was traditionally slavery, is this now still slavery? Or is there a more appropriate word for it?
There is no legal distinction.
There's no legal distinction.
Yeah.
So are you
constitutionally, there's no differentiation between indentured servitude and slavery within the 13th Amendment.
Okay, and then you would consider indentured servitude. Is that what you just said?
Well, let's call it indentured servitude.
No, you said servitude. Okay.
Yes.
So indentured servitude, you map that on to being in prison. Is that correct?
Well, let's reframe it slightly. So, in theory, you could have a distinction between indentured servitude and slavery, being that one is for life. So slavery is for life, perhaps intergenerationally. Indentured servitude is
often not, sometimes.
But this is all horrific pathological stuff from the past that we want to get away from. So why are we trying to have a stupid conversation about the technical distinctions when it's not even like the 13th Amendment outright bans slavery and allows indentured servitude? It doesn't differentiate. It says both of these are allowed within prison, but are banned within the general public. We need to have a new, either a rewriting of the 13th Amendment or a new amendment to the Constitution that bans this stuff outright. Why are we having a dumb conversation about it?
No, that's fine.
It's the idea there is that there's some kind of knee-jerk embedded racism that is not intentional racism, but is sort of a programmed ego defense reaction to bringing up this topic that causes people to defend something that is indefensible.
Okay, so I don't know that it's entirely indefensible. It depends on exactly what you're saying, and that's why I think we do need to get into the details. And so real quick, when you say indentured servitude, you're specifically pointing to not only being in prison, but then being asked to use your time, your person, to be able to produce profits while you're in prison for, is that what you're saying? Like more the for-profit prison, where, because indentured servitude, so what are you serving at that point? I'm trying to understand, what is the indentured servitude? Is it just being in prison, or is it something on top of that?
For one, like people in prison are not paid minimum wage when they're doing labor.
Okay, yeah. Is that the real thing though? Is that like the only thing, or is it more?
It's that the entire thread from like the history of slavery in the United States through to the 13th Amendment, through to the current day, we haven't corrected the fundamental pathology. We've rationalized away from it while allowing some semblance of it to shamble on. We need to nip this bullshit in the bud and get rid of slavery.
Okay, so
full stop.
Full stop. But this does go across all races, because white people, all people are. Okay,
it's not it's not about like saying we have slavery but our slaves are diverse does not help the argument.
Yeah, but whenever people typically talk about modern slavery, they are pointing at people of color or Black people, and then they bring up these situations where it does not appear to map towards traditional or classic slavery. I don't.
Well,
I'm not
what it
getting
is,
that.
like, let me reframe this so that it's easier to approach.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got this historical thread of
Yes.
this barbaric slave trade
Mhm.
in, like, in both the sense that it was the Barbary pirates to some extent that was participating in it, and it was the Barbary coast, but also, barbaric in like the modern sense of diabolical
Mhm.
and uncivilized. And
Wouldn't you
this,
say that civilization has always had some sort of underclass, though, that has been able to build
but
up the
like
society and
this is
civilization?
not aligned with the values that we hold as a modern liberal society where we want to have equality of opportunity.
Sure.
So, like, again, this is like, there's some abstract discussion that might be interesting at some point to get into, but we're starting there instead of ending up there as like some sort of like, well, as a historical curiosity, this is worth examining because there might be insights that we don't naturally have, instead of the immediate place that we end up in this discussion. Like, you're on my side, except that you're arguing a devil's advocate that you don't want to be holding, but somehow you've been culturally conditioned into holding.
I do and I don't, because I'm wondering if there is a viable path that is an alternative. So on the specific thing that is getting work out of someone who against their will is being held captive or whatever, someone who's in prison, and then getting them below minimum wage. I don't even know what it is. It's like a quarter an hour. That does
Something
need
absurd.
that needs to go away. We're definitely on
Yeah.
the same side there. So if that would be in line with getting with transforming the 13th, I think you said section 2, I'm on board with that. I guess that there is a knee-jerk thing that happens with that, with the label that it's slavery, and maybe it is in my ignorance. And then there's a knee-jerk thing that it's pointed, that its purpose, the way that it's structured, is pointed towards racism, right? So towards black people and minorities.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's delve into this from like a, I guess, psychocultural perspective. So I bill myself as a cultural philosopher.
Okay.
So that's the field of intellectual study that I partake in. I invented it for myself because nobody really had a intellectual field that I think that I considered to capture what I wanted to do. Cultural philosophy seemed to be a good description of it. And it turns out that I'm not the only person who's doing whatever cultural philosophy is. No idea what it is, but I know I'm not the only person doing it. So I feel pretty confident that there's a exploratory landscape that I am in, that I'm trying to articulate to other people and also explore, that is being realized, in parallel by multiple people, but that's a whole different discussion. Point is, in that framework, I think a lot about psychology and the relationship of psychology to cultural memes, and the relationship to cultural memes of evolutionary survival and to broad systemic forces.
Okay.
So it's the integration of like economics, psychology, philosophy, and personal, sort of what is good in life. And about like all that stuff. So from that perspective, there's a psychological cultural thing where the way that prisons work is deeply pathological, and we have not fixed this across time. So when you're just like, hey, prisons are pathological, people will be like, well, yeah, but what exactly were we going to do about it? I'm busy with other problems. The people in jail deserve it. So it might be bad, but this is a low priority.
Yeah, no, I think it's a high priority. And I think that in any which way, like, I want to see us upgrade our systems because the world has changed. The world has changed since we had the concept of prison and imprisonment. And so I am willing to experiment around and to go along all different thought processes for how we could shape this. I do tend to think that that when people start, in my opinion, going off the rails with, well, let's just do away with prisons, I'm like, I don't know. How do we get there? So it depends on what exactly you would see that we need. What is your path to something with the current domain of there are actions that there appear to be not in society's benefit, that there need to be consequences for? Like, what is your box that fills that would be better than what we currently have?
Well, this immediately takes us to some technical implementation when we have no framework to build a technical implementation. So now we're dead in the water again. I could tell you my off-the-cuff version of what would make prison better, and you would listen to me, and then you'd be like, there's a nitpick here, and so we can't implement it.
Yeah, I guess the way that I would look at it,
I'm not applying this to you. I'm applying this to the devils to which you're advocating.
Right.
To try and differentiate your from a personal to a your plural. Since we're both kind of playing devil's advocate against each other for positions that we don't exactly hold, but that we're trying to have a discussion that's a good faith discussion between us as persons, between two ideological frames that are not able to communicate to each other. So you and me, we are in good faith, and I want to emphasize that, but we're playing sort of ideological roles that are not the summation of ourselves, and we're getting caught up in that a little bit.
Okay, then you continue on, because it appears the way that I would approach it would be to look at the thing that is of particular interest and to say, we want to end here, but what are the implications for that? So how could we reasonably everything that wraps into that is influenced by, and that goes both ways to having influence with this thing that we're talking about, how would all of that be affected, and how could we shape that towards a stabilized system where that thing could actually be realized?
I follow you. So, continuing kind of with the narrative of this, it's, we get dead in the water when we go immediately to implementation because we don't have a framework for applying an implementation.
Okay.
And so, then we're dead in the water again. So then we need some kind of escalation. This is a real problem that a lot of people are discarding, and we can't go immediately to an implementation because we don't have a bedrock from which to build that implementation that's shared.
But would that bedrock implementation shared be what I was pointing at earlier, that we don't even have enough people who are exploring this and coming together to talk about this in kind of sane ways?
Like, this is the kind of thing, is we need to start having conversations that explore this. This is the generalists. This is the two eyes coming to meet each other, perhaps back to back, but at least within shouting distance.
Right. So,
that's all of what we're talking about and trying to do, and what I'm trying to do with my channel, and what you're interested in, even within your group, who's sort of like working at this from a kind of right-wing perspective, but as a holistic approach to society instead of from a tribal society, even though they're caught up in a bit of tribalism. Yeah, we're on the same page there. So kind of back to the narrative of this is we need to escalate the problem, and we need a bedrock framework. So those are the two missing parts.
Sure.
So escalation is, hey, the thing that's bad in slavery, the thing that's bad in prison is slavery, which is bad, and we agree that it's bad. So now we've got a bedrock framework and an escalation. And it's also partly true. You can see the single thread of slavery from the Atlantic slave trade to the 13th Amendment, to the hole in the 13th Amendment, which that slavery goes through, into prisons. So now we've got a bedrock framework, a thread, and we've also got kind of an oppression narrative that motivates a lot of people to try and solve this problem because they feel the negative side effects of it.
Yeah, I there is something in me that wants to push back on that, but that's okay. I pretty well mostly track with that, and I do have an overall sense that the money incentive, or the money players that use the people who are in prison, that needs to get taken out. And if that ties into the 13th section 2, that needs to get rewritten. And the general thought with the war on drugs, that needs to get totally reassessed. So it sounds like we're on the same page. I am getting tripped up with a couple of words, and that's okay.
Yeah. And, like, kind of the thing here is, so now we've got the necessary pieces, but we don't know how to have the conversation because the language around it is too emotionally charged.
Correct. That's true.
But so we've got a lot of the way there, purely within kind of a social justice framework.
Mhm.
And so now we need to figure out how to translate this conversation into something that is intercompatible with a white person's view of the right way to build a systemic solution.
Thoughts?
Right. So
Yeah.
so we need to fix the 13th Amendment thing. So that, we need to say, hey, in America, slavery is hard illegal. Fuck that shit. It's bad. It's always been bad. We've known it's bad since we wrote the Constitution.
Mhm.
We got screwed up about it because, habits die hard. Bad habits die hard. And, we fought a civil war about this. We shed our blood to end this bad habit. And somehow we're just so bad at this that, we got stuck with a, bad implementation of the end of it. And so we need to patch that. And
Okay. Yeah.
so, that's workable. It's like Thomas Jefferson, who wrote, the opening lines of the Constitution, to my understanding, his original draft had all men are equal, period. It didn't have this sort of like, the phrase about slaves that was put in by, the other people who were writing the Constitution, and it was sort of a compromise that allowed them to get from the draft stage into the final stage so that we could leave the oppression of the United Kingdom and the colonial kingdom that was ruling over us so that we could try to start pursuing freedom. And so because we sought expedience in the drafting stage, we have paid for it: blood, tooth, nail, claw, eyes, and everything else, piss and shit. In the interim time, and sort of in the Jordan Peterson sense, do what is meaningful, not what is expedient. The original draft was more meaningful, even though Jefferson himself kept slaves. There's either he was raping a woman in a basement dungeon, or they were actually lovers and he freed her children because that was the best that he could do within the situation that he was in. And I don't want to get into the historical reality versus the 1619 versus the papered over kindergarten narrative of American history that we get. But I'm pretty sure that the papered over version is not right. And
it's somewhere in the middle.
We need to address this stuff, because like it seems to me whenever I read Jefferson, I'm like, shit, this guy was on point. He says a lot of like I respect Aristotle a lot, and he said some stuff that I didn't like, but he's the closest anybody got to evolution before Darwin. And he got a lot of stuff right, and a lot of his insights that are distasteful, shall we say, are still insightful in the nature of man, into the human, like in human nature. It may not be the right solution to that insight, but it is nevertheless some form of insight. And so having the this explored, it's worth examining that, because there's a lot of understanding there. Like the more, oftentimes the things that we label as evil are where the answers to our questions are, but they're answers that we don't have the right question. The evil person has the right question, but not the right answer.
Interesting.
And it is up to the good people to ask the evil questions so that they can give the good answers, versus ask the good questions that have meaningless answers.
That makes sense to me.
So, when I read Jefferson, he says stuff that I'm like, wow, this guy was on point. So I don't want to immediately, black hole the guy because of sort of dubious stuff that may or may not be true in the way that it's narrativized, but doesn't impugn his character in terms of the Jefferson that I know. Like, I don't see the thread of character that I would expect in the person who would do the evil things that have been described.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but like, I don't know. I didn't live that world. I know that was an entirely different world. That's like 10, 12 generations removed from where we are, and each generation has seen a new world. You know, it's been going at a pretty crazy pace for a while since the Industrial Revolution, whatever you want to point to. So we can look from the current lens and our current values, and then point back and then see evil. I think it's pretty easy to see some evils in some people. They were definitely extraordinary men. They were flawed men. They were complex men, and they were a man of their world, their time, trying to usher in a new chapter. And so I do give them some leeway, and that doesn't mean that they weren't flawed men. So you know,
and so you know the way that because I'm sort of talking to the like to the Americana, right? And so the way that I've kind of like laid out this case, that is this discussion that is embedded in this broader discussion that we're having, that's vitally important to actually unpacking the Constitution in a way where we can correctly patch the 13th Amendment so that we can begin to fix, you know, this thread of pathology that's been with us since the beginning. And, you know, and so that's why this conversation has gone the way that it has. And so kind of the thing that I've taken is the Constitution is a foundational document in terms of the modern world, in terms of nearly every good thing that we have in society is built on top of some aspect of the Constitution. It's really miraculously good. It is not the words of prophets ordained by God to have no sin upon their souls.
Yep.
It is the word of flawed men, as you said. But moreover, flawed men who gave us a better vision of the future than they had of themselves. And I have deep respect for that. And so the Constitution, we know, is flawed because we've amended it many times.
Yep.
And there is really no amendment that is like catastrophically bad, short of prohibition, which was very much a moral panic.
Okay.
And, you know, we recognized our folly and corrected it. Like, we've done a pretty good job of like trying to fix things. We have plenty of amendments which you could say are flawed and not a full implementation of the deep values that underlie the words that, you know, the spirit of the law is higher and greater than the word of the law, and all we have is the word of the law. And in that sense, there are several amendments, the Second Amendment being one that I have high in my mind, where we need to rediscover the spirit of it and repackage it. The 13th Amendment is definitely another case where we need to rediscover the spirit and repackage it. But, you know, the Second Amendment, those are longer discussions. The point is, we have the ability to fix our problems given to us by the Founding Fathers. And we need to give ourselves license to apply our values to their greatest depth of character, not to short step ourselves in the application of our values for short-sighted, immediate, pragmatic reasons.
Well said.
And the greatest folly of the Founding Fathers was the perceived necessity to make that trade-off. Because we have not, in a terribly deep way, deviated from the founding values of America. We have largely failed to uphold them.
That's probably true.
You know, like the civil rights movement of the 1960s is in the Constitution. All men are created equal.
I'm sure you're going to find a lot of contradictions in there, though.
Oh, there's plenty of contradictions, but like, you know, the, you know, democratic push to like unionize, and a lot of the stuff that came out of that movement, the racial stuff, that's all, like, we the people, that's all there in the Constitution.
Mhm.
It's the values have been refined, improved. We've added, I think, new values. I think one of the core values that we've added, that we're or at least we're figuring out how to add, is sustainability. I think that that's a new value. I think that perhaps sustainability is in fact the highest sacred value. I think, Brett talks about freedom as being like the highest integrative value, and I think that sustainability is the highest integrative value, because true sustainability is a relationship dynamic that does not break down.
Mhm.
And it is also something that carries on. Freedom can lead you into folly.
Yeah, I think that sustainability would have to get unpacked in a lot of ways.
Oh,
And
it would be a entire lifetime of writing.
Yeah, because I can take that in multiple interpretations and at different scales, and then come up with different cases that might push against sustainability, just depending on, depending on the scale that you're looking at.
Tyrannical empire is not sustainable because it demands its own overthrow.
So, but does not every system trend towards entropy? Every system that's constrained by resources over time, like the whole of Terra, can be.
We get to cheat for billions of years.
Yeah, we definitely do. Yeah.
So it's like, on some abstract level, maybe, I'm not so confident that we understand the dynamics of the universe in such a way that the second law of thermodynamics holds.
Mm.
I mean, we have dark energy as the largest single fundamental element of the universe. That implies that entropy is actually in reverse.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that whenever we talk about these things, like, I think that there's laymen, and then there's the experts that talk about them, and they might have different interpretations on this.
But the thing is, like the level of the nature of the universe is fundamentally this way. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I think we understand how. Yeah, it's like, I'm not dedicated to building the worst possible world that we can build. I'm dedicated to building the best possible world that we can build. I'd rather envision the most beautiful thing and then try to build it than to envision the best version of the worst reality.
Yeah, but there's all sorts of things in between that, because the best version of the thing that I can imagine is not practical. I can't realize utopia. I can't attempt to realize utopia. You know what I mean? Like,
no, I mean that there's definitely a level where it's like, naively, like, just imagining that we can sing Imagine enough times and all the bad things in the world will go away is not exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
But on another level, if more people were singing Imagine, and meaning it, we'd probably fix a couple things along the way.
I think we'd fix it. Like, I just think that there is, like, who knows? Human systems are so incredibly complex, is that you can, again, it's like you can really think, I think that we're still shooting in the dark. I really think we're shooting in the dark, where if we think that we've calculated it out, and we think that, and maybe it is because there's not enough people doing the actual calculations and imagining this, that may be true, but it appears to me right now that I don't want to be a politician. I don't want to be the one who's pulling the levers, because, like, I'm pretty sure that whatever I do, that I'm going to piss some people off, that there's going to be some consequences that I can't predict. Sorry, that's kind of my perspective in this.
Oh yeah, I definitely track with that. There's a level of necessary humility and sensitivity to feedback that we're not managing well in the modern world.
That we might not even be able to track well the feedback that happens.
True. The most important feedback may be very minor in its immediate loop, and then sort of escalates into catastrophe in such a way where you need to catch it early, whereas a lot of feedback might be very, very loud, but it's sustainably loud.
And we're just not there to where we can.
The differentiation is difficult to make. So yeah, there's a lot of it, but it's like, I'm not handicapping myself with a false confidence in the intractability of the problem.
Mhm.
And like, because if the problem if the sort of the Malthusian struggle is as intractable as we imagine, believing that is as intractable as we imagine doesn't improve things. So
No, it doesn't.
why bother with it? And I would much prefer, I think that, if it's true in that way, it might be actually practical to achieve the illusion of it not being true. In which case, is it not true?
Is it true?
If you can achieve the illusion, and the illusion is real, it may not be a permanent illusion, but is that not better than to be embedded permanently in the Malthusian struggle?
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is for each step of the game, can we not believe we can get there so that we can realize more time and then continue to realize more time and continue to kind of progress? Something along those lines?
Well, some of that. But, moreover, I don't have a lot of confidence in Malthusian struggle. I have a pretty strong, game theoretic take, and that I've synthesized as much sort of game theory wisdom as I can take in, and kind of my take is, most people are 2/3 good, 1/3 evil, and the service of the good.
Yeah, so I don't know if I fully understand the Malthusian struggle, but in my mind, the basic sense that you're going to always you're going to have an imbalance, and that there will inevitably be a collapse.
Well, it's kind of like the fundamental nature of the universe is competition. It's impossible to escape this. Any attempt to do so puts you at a competitive disadvantage, and therefore racism.
Okay, so yeah, none of that works for me. I think that it appears to be that we are still playing a game. We will continue to play a game where there's some form of competition, but there is also this other dynamic of synergy, and we see this, and that's why we build big cities. That's why we take these risks, and that's why civilization is able to innovate its way out over and over again.
Game theoretically, the best move is cooperation.
I think it's both, man. I think that it depends. I mean, I guess so. I think that there is always some low level. It's like it's kind of like the idea of frenemies. I think it's like at some point, yeah. So it's like
no. What you're getting is that play war,
right?
The dynamic of frenemies, the dynamic that Eric has talked about of rival. In other words, your rival is not your enemy. Your rival is somebody with whom you have a fundamental disagreement, who, if you were to be wrong, you would want them to be right.
That's correct. I know a lot of people that are fit that description right now. Yeah.
So that is a cooperative dynamic.
Okay, and it can still
plays the game of competition.
That plays the game. That's what I was going to say. Is like you can still integrate in competition with that. Okay, got it.
There's it's a cooperative dynamic that plays the game of competition, because you cooperating on it's essentially you cooperating on the motivation of pursuing answers instead of you cooperating on a singular answer.
Right, on like your answer.
Yes. And the idea there is that you might need to, like, if you're on an island and you're trying to figure out a way off the island, and no,
real quick, can we make it in 5 minutes? I want to try to go in 5 minutes. I'm starting to crash. Sorry.
Yeah. So here's better. If you're trying to climb a mountain, you're specifically trying to climb a mountain so as to find the best way to climb the mountain. You can cooperate on one route, or you can try 5 different routes.
Yep.
If you can survive your route, then every extra amount of, like, within reason, every extra amount of effort that you waste on that route is wasted on that route versus other routes. So you want a diversity of routes, which means that you have to have competition between the people pursuing different routes, but the goal is the same. And really, you should be cooperating with each other on the routes that you are taking, because the goal is the top of the mountain. And it's not like there's a competition where it's like for the motivation of pursuing your routes versus giving up on conquering the mountain. You compete with each other to get to the top first, but the real thing is, that's trivial compared with getting to the top.
Yeah, you want to find a viable path, and you also want to be the one who discovers it. But ultimately, if someone else discovers it, that's a viable path. Let's go.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so where this becomes pathological is somebody finds a route, closes all the other routes, and then sets up a toll booth on their route.
Right. So that is what is Brett's term for this? So this is, I'm not getting it right now.
Well, it's what you might call economic extraction, but rent seeking is essentially the term that Brett uses.
Yeah. So I agree with it. I guess it's not clearly explained, and there must be a reason that it's not clearly explained, because it being hidden, it continues to manifest, and it's the people who figure those out win, and everyone else doesn't. And so the people who won, I guess, just want to keep us not seeing this clearly, that it's overall not in our collective interest to continue along.
Here's the thing: is this is one of the frustrations with some of the IDW lingo. Is they talk about meritocracy, and as far as I can tell, the reason that the rent seekers maintain the rent seeking is that if they were in a meritocracy, they would lose.
Right.
And in my opinion, a lot of the people who are fighting against, on social justice side, who are fighting against this, are fighting against it because in an actual meritocracy, they would win.
Who would win? I'm sorry.
People within social justice.
Okay, and I think that there is something here, because the people, there is this sense that, at least from the people that I talk to, that some of the people within, and this probably tracks on the more extreme interpretation. It just depends. It's like if I get inside this and start talking to a lot of social justice people and realize that their aims are aligned with what the vast majority of us seem to want, then I'll change my perception. But for now, it appears it's like everything is twisted. I guess the narrative is totally different on from what I take in, and that it's that the people who are, a lot of times, the people who are pushing for this, they don't realize that they're working against their own interests. So it just depends. It's like there's two entirely different stories that we're hearing whenever we think of these words.
Here's a better, because the meritocratic thing gets tied up in a lot of sort of rhetorical triggers or ego defense. It's like this, rhetorical stuff. Like it's embedded in our thinking, like on a cultural level, where it's fish and water. And so I don't like it. So there are some successful people that to me are spectacularly impressive, who are also rent seekers.
Right, and they may not realize that they're rent seekers.
Well, it's not even that. It's that within the current dynamics of society, if you wish to do good in the world, you have to be a rent seeker in order to support yourself.
Okay.
So an example of this that I think works well is Elon Musk. Because Elon Musk is definitely brilliant in his ability to coordinate brilliant engineers to do awesome shit.
Right.
I don't know how individually brilliant Elon Musk is.
It depends on how you're qualifying these things. I mean, like what?
I get it. So here's kind of like the take on Elon Musk. Elon Musk is the best person to coordinate a bunch of nerdy engineers to do awesome shit because he's succeeding at it.
Right.
He is not necessarily the person that I want to be in charge of coordinating all the nerdy engineers of the world. or of coordinating society more broadly. I
Mhm.
think that his specialization is in coordinating nerdy engineers to do awesome shit.
I mean, I will agree with you. He does not need to be our next president or anything like that. So
Yeah, and like on an ideological level, I think that a lot of his positions, on sort of his sort of, you know, great men of history libertarianism,
Mhm.
where it's you know you know let's do awesome stuff kind of approach is like that's necessary
Mhm.
for him to be able to coordinate this um movement of high tech in the attempt to do awesome stuff that might have in some sense the ability to save humanity,
Mhm.
going to Mars. And it's not even really going to Mars, it's having a industrial base capable of going to Mars and going to space more broadly, so that if we get the technology to travel in an interstellar way, or to
It's a baby
get
step.
out, get outside of like classic Newtonian stuff,
Mhm.
that we have the industrial base to make that phase transition, or to make that path dependence jump.
I mean,
And
that's pretty much what Bezos wants to do as well. He has a different take, his vision, but yeah, it's baby steps. You have to PR, you have to sell it to the public,
Yep.
and you can only go as far as the average mind can go, and he's already stretching it a little. So that's what he's going to
and
say
so
it
like
is, and who knows?
there's a level of necessary propaganda,
Mhm.
and sort of like the economics motivates a lot of it, because that's the tool that you have underlying the propaganda.
Right.
Is you got a lot of nerdy engineers who could do anything. A lot of them could be micro rent seekers, on the internet, coding something, or micro rent seekers, wherever they are, or they could be coordinated together into a larger apparatus that is in some part rent seeking, some part seeking salvation, and that's better. But because the dynamics require rent seeking for success, we're still stuck with the rent seeking. But I don't want to divorce Elon Musk from the ability to do awesome stuff. I want to fix the economy so that he can do it in a non-rent seeking way.
So I agree with that. Is there a 2-minute wrap up from this point?
So, but there are a lot of people who are more easily conflated with Elon Musk in the billionaire class, who are like pure rent seekers. I think Zuckerberg might be the foremost. I think that Bezos is rent seeker with a tiny bit of vision, but I wouldn't put him very high up there.
He may just be
Then
he may just be more long range, where let me continue to build the pot, and then I'm gonna, before I die out, I'm gonna set something in motion that'll keep going for centuries. You
I
don't think so? You think that's just
no
a ruse or something?
I like with Bezos, I think that it's sort of he's trying to copy Elon Musk.
Hmm.
Like Elon Musk has this weird vibe to him.
Hmm.
He's got this like very nerdy vibe, but it's
Mhm.
like cool nerdy. It's kind of like he's got a Steve Jobs persona.
Mhm.
Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, they're both very nerdy guys, but they have this persona, they have impact.
Mhm.
And when Elon walks out on stage, it's like, and he introduces the Cybertruck. It's a fucking crazy idea, but he has the stage set in such a way where it sounds awesome while he's doing it.
Mhm.
It's like, he manages to have this persona that works. Bezos, when like he looks like fucking the
Dr.
Emperor
Evil.
from Star Wars, Doctor Evil.
He looks
It's
like
like,
Dr. Evil, man.
but
The
he's
eye
like,
thing and everything.
it's so disturbing. Like, it's so creepy when he goes out on stage. It has a completely opposite effect.
Yeah.
And it's because I don't think that Bezos is genuine. Like, I think that Bezos is doing this because it's what you do to become successful, and being successful is how you prove to yourself that you're better than everybody else.
Yeah, so I can see both, and I'm not sure on the guy. I can see your take on it, and I can see an alternate take. I'm not certain, but that's besides the point. Do we have a 1-minute wrap from here?
Yes. So, kind of the purpose of this conversation, before I went into it, was to timestamp things.
Mhm.
So I could say, hey, this is before the election. I'm thinking about the long term of this process. I'm thinking about how to fix society. I'm thinking about how to integrate the left and the right in a way where social justice and IBW can meet each other in fair territory as frenemies, perhaps, but not in conflict. You know,
Not an
perhaps we need,
existential conflict or anything
yes,
like that.
definitely
Yeah.
not as existential conflict. And you know, it's that I do not particularly care who wins between Donald Trump or Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, because neither of these people are the people that we want to be in leadership. It's the people that we're forced to choose between because of plurality voting and how our voting system is broken. Until we're
Right.
fixing that, we are not actually fixing our fundamental system. So I'm here about the fundamental systems and about the core humanity that we share. And I wanted to say this because one of the things is that, you know, if one side wins and starts to turn pathological and sort of the power mad sense where it's like it's so afraid of the other side that it's going to grab as much power as it possibly can, you know, we're going to escalate out of this election.
Yes.
Almost no doubt. And we need to be, we need, like, this timestamp is to say, hey, I'm trying to not escalate. You can see that, you know, when I'm talking from a place that is not the power grab. That is not a like false front to lull you into a sense of tranquility so that I can take more from you. That's not where I am at. I'm trying to be in the place where I'm earnestly and honestly trying to solve the problem, but I'm also forced to play some defense because the dynamics are escalating. And if I'm going to have any hope for myself and for society that good things are going to happen at some point in the future, I need to be aiming for a platform and a place and a team that will listen to me if it wins.
I fully agree with all of that. Yeah.
That is like where I am going to be at some point in the future, partially participating in this eventual power mad grab dynamic. I'm going to be on a team doing something that is going to be team oriented in some way, that is going to be me trying to build a relationship with the people on my team so they will listen to me so that we can reach a point of de-escalation. And I may be playing both teams to some level on this because I am seeking to build integrity between me and others so that I can play the de-escalation game and find congruent ground where both sides can meet and shake in peace and build resolutions that have high intellectual integrity, cultural integrity, that build us into a better future, that, you know, we can all participate in good faith and have hope in. But no matter who wins, we're all losing. And until we are all winning, we're going to be forced into playing games that we do not want to play. And I want it to be known to the world that I've recognized this before it has happened. Although it is already partially happening in 2020, 2021, it's going to be more pathological.
That's my biggest
2023, 2024, and we're going to need to be building the unity movement as a broad base. And I don't mean in terms of lots of people. I mean in terms of ideological integration across different viewpoints. Yes. We need to integrate as many viewpoints as possible. We need to have a reasoned position that integrates as many viewpoints as possible.
I want to also say that okay, so a couple things. First off, my views are not representative of the unity movement in general. I've expressed a lot of views, and the group that I mentioned is not directly unity. And also that I actually do have some solutions that we didn't get into here that we could potentially get into in the future. There are a lot of things in the works for unity, and people are attempting to hash that out. And what you said in the last couple of minutes perfectly tracks with what I'd like to align with as well.
Definitely. Like, I only really speak for myself, but I want speaking for myself to represent as many viewpoints as possible so that people who see themselves in me or see some of what they see through the words that I've aligned with what I see, so that we can come together in a vision that isn't a myopic, like all the eyes turn inward kind of tribe, but in a all the eyes turn outward but all the voices turn inward kind of tribe, in the sense that I was talking about in the very beginning, where we look in all directions but are still
Right.
within shouting distance.
Very cool, man. That's a great way of ending this. So it's been a few
Yeah,
hours here.
so-
I really appreciate this, man.
Thanks for coming on, Brandon.
Sure, this has been
And I'd be glad to have you on a week from now, after the election, to talk about some of our predictions of what will happen. I've had predictions about what will happen, but mostly the problem with making these predictions is somewhat they fall into the trap of tribalizing people against each other, and
Yep.
it's like, I've wanted to figure out a way to warn people about the dangers that I see on either side that not many other people are seeing,
Mhm.
in terms of the feedback loops that side has with the other side or with its own side, that
Mhm.
will extremify the stuff. But mostly that gets labeled as
I know.
sort of propaganda attacks from the other ideological team, and so
Yep.
like it doesn't help much to talk about them. And so it's like, I don't know how to warn people that they should be voting third party, because we need to protect our sanity, and the best way to figure out what we actually want in a world with so much propaganda is to vote for what we think we want, instead of instead
Are
of
told or
strategically
are-
voting instead of strategically voting against what we don't want. And it's like, no matter who wins, we all lose. So let's start practicing winning, so that we're in a play winning situation. Even though we know we're going to lose, we're voting for what we want, which means that we're believing in what a win will eventually be, and then that will build momentum for whatever is going to solve the duopoly. And in that, I don't know if you want to riff on politics and voting for a moment, or if you want to call it a night. But
yeah, I think I'm ready to call it a night.